Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the RNC Rocked Day One, Victor Avila, Anatomy of a Marxist Shakedown. You do not want to miss this story. And Patriots done with masks and tyranny. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
And hello again and welcome to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. We've had day one of the RNC convention, and I might be a tiny bit biased, but it's kind of like the two political parties are talking about two different countries. It's like you can hardly believe they both live in and are experiencing the same country, the same history, the same people, the same goodness. But the RNC convention was upbeat, positive on day one. The Republicans switched things around, so President Trump already accepted the nomination on day one, had his first chance at the spotlight. There were many great speeches yesterday. I can't share them all. I want to share clips from just two of them. There were, of course, great speeches by Nikki Haley, Senator Tim Scott, but the two I want to share with you, these are really stories, I think, that tug at the heartstrings of the American people. And at the same time, they help the American people see the real-life consequence of policy differences, the real-life consequence in day-to-day life of your average American of policy differences between the two parties. One other preliminary point in today's First Five. I like the feel of the Republican convention because in so many issues, in so many instances, Republicans and conservatives are always playing defense, always saying, denying, we're not bad, we didn't say that, we didn't mean that, we're not racist, we're not xenophobic, we're not we spend all our time denying things. This whole convention has a positive, upbeat, this is who we are, what we believe in, what we're all about, and we want to make sure you American people understand what the American left is all about. The first clip I sent to Matt, the very wonderful producer, is a clip by a man who's been on my show before, Andrew Pollack. He is the father of a young girl who was killed. His daughter's name was Meadow. He wrote a book, Why Meadow Died, and he was on this show last year, and he talked about what policies, when he finally figured out she died in a school shooting, his entire investigation into the shooting caused him to realize that it was policies of the American left that resulted in his daughter's death, resulted in the fact that a dangerous young man was allowed to remain in public school when, as he said, red flares, warning signals everywhere, but allowed to stay in a public school under the just idiotic policy of the American left, restorative education or restorative justice. So here we have Andrew Pollack at the RNC.
I was invited to the White House. The truth is, I had just buried my daughter that week. I really wasn't interested in public events like a tour or a photo op. I was interested in answers and solutions. At the White House, my family and I sat with the president in the Oval Office and told him about Meadow. I told him what we knew. I told him that his administration needed to take a closer look at what went wrong and why. And I got to see who President Trump really is. He's a good man and a great listener, and he cuts through the BS. But I could believe it. After my daughter's murder, the media didn't seem interested in the facts, so I found them myself. I learned that gun control laws didn't fail my daughter. People did. The gunman had threatened to kill his classmates before. He had threatened to rape them. He had threatened to shoot up the school. Every red flag you could imagine. But the school didn't just miss these red flags, they knowingly ignored them. Far-left Democrats in our school district made this shooting possible because they implemented something they called restorative justice. This policy, which really just blames teachers for students' failures, puts kids and teachers at risk and makes shootings more likely. But it was billed as a pioneering approach to discipline and safety. I was just fine with the old approach to discipline and safety. It was called discipline and safety. But the Obama-Biden administration took Parkland's bad policies and forced them into schools across America.
I tell you guys, that is so powerful because he lost his daughter. He was on my show fairly shortly after the death of his daughter, Meadow, and he's an amazingly strong man, and he's making the point, which America needs to understand. Not only will leftists try to solve gun violence by just taking away guns versus dealing with the policies that allow a young man, clearly as mentally troubled as this shooter was, to remain in the public schools. He also pointed out later in his remarks that the Biden team has already promised, because President Trump got rid of the restorative justice system that was put in place by Obama. Trump took it away. Biden's promising to bring it back. Very powerful, very impactful. Second little clip from the first 5 from the RNC convention last night. These are remarks by a guy named Maximo Alvarez. He lives in Florida. His family has escaped communism, and I wish I could play the entire set of remarks he had, but I can't. I have a short clip from him. I'll ask Matt the Wonderful to play that now.
My family has fled totalitarianism and communism more than once. First my dad from Spain, then from Cuba. But my families don't run away. By the grace of God, I live the American dream, the greatest blessing I ever had. I'm speaking to you today because I have seen people like this before. I've seen movements like this before. I've seen ideas like this before. And I am here to tell you, we cannot let them take over our country. I heard the promises of Fidel Castro, and I can never forget all those who grew up around me, who looked like me, who suffered and starved and died because they believed those empty promises. They swallow the communist poison pill. Those false promises spread the wealth. Free education, free health care. They fund the police. Trust the socialist state more than your family and your community. They don't sound radical to my ears. They sound familiar. And Fidel Castro was asked if he was a communist. He said he was a Roman Catholic. He knew he had to hide the truth. But the country I was born in is gone, totally destroyed. When I watch the news in Seattle, Chicago, Portland, and other cities, when I see the history being rewritten, when I hear the promises, I've heard echoes of the former life I never wanted to hear again.
This, my very fine friends, is extremely impactful and powerful. This is a man understanding what it's like to live under tyranny because he lived under it in Cuba. He is telling America in the plainest imaginable terms that what messages you hear from the leftists running in the Democrat Party, from the Biden team, from the Democrats in Washington, from the Democrat National Platform, it is the platform of radical Marxism. He talks about the violence he's seeing in the streets and the danger that is facing every American living in Portland, Chicago, Kenosha, many other places. And he's talking about, I've seen this before, he understands it to be orchestrated by Marxist leftists. He understands the danger that will come to America. Very, very powerful. 2 other speakers, I don't have time to play them right now, but I may play them later in the week. One was Rebecca Friedrichs, who is a fabulous speaker. She's actually going to be at my conference in Texas on September 26th. She's speaking there too. But she spoke about the danger of the teachers' unions in this country crushing the freedom of teachers to teach students the way they want to teach them. She talked specifically about the idea that leftist-controlled unions, which are unions are inherently leftist, push a picture of America as a country filled with hatred, a country that is rooted in racism, and that they force teachers to teach this ugly image of America. Therefore, no wonder our kids leave school not respecting and loving this country. Last speaker I'll mention briefly, there were so many great ones, is Herschel Walker, who I'd never heard this story before. Apparently, he's an African-American guy. You all know his name, who that is. But he's been friends with President Trump for years and years, including one time President Trump went on vacation with them down to Disney World and actually rode It's a Small World, the ride, with this man's family. Really did a great job the first night of the RNC convention, making people understand the threats of the left and the humanity and goodness of the Republican team and of President Trump. And that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five. I mentioned at the start of the show I have a guest. I love having guests in studio. I have Victor Avila in studio with me. He's joined me in the past for our show. He is actually a candidate. He's running for city council. He'll probably tell you about that, but that's not why he's here. He's here to tell you a story. I called this segment The Anatomy of a Marxist Shakedown, and I am not exaggerating. If you had told me this kind of thing would happen in the great state of Texas, even 5 years ago, I would say that it's not going to happen in Texas, maybe in some loopy place in California. But we are watching the brazen and growing determination of the Marxist left in this country to force their will on the American people, to get their way, bring their radical leftist ideas to power in America through the use of contorting and manipulating race, using arguments about racism and alleged racism and systemic racism to justify the tyranny they plan to bring to you. So he's going to talk with us about something that's happening in the area where he lives, and it's actually in a school district, the Carroll ISD School District, where he became very involved in a project that really has exposed how radically left the American, how radically extreme the American left is and the tactics they use to bring their tyranny to the American people. So, Victor Avila, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much for having me today.
So glad you could be here. Okay, we're going to take a minute to talk about your campaign. You're running for city council, and that's on election day. And this is you can tell our listeners quickly about your campaign for city council.
Yes, I'm running for Southlake City Council, place number 6. Our local election was originally scheduled for May, but was postponed due to COVID. It will now be held during the general election on November 3rd. So please look for my name down in the ballot there, and I hope I could earn your support and your vote.
Okay, but now let's talk about why he's really here. Why we have him in studio today, what I cannot wait to tell you about, is a story, and it starts out in January 2019 when Victor and others had applied for and been accepted into an entity in Carroll, and in Texas we have a school district, an area, Carroll, Carroll, independent school district. They launched a district diversity council, DDC. We have a few acronyms in here, we've got to keep them straight, but DDC is District Diversity Council. What was the role of that council?
What I thought the role was going to be initially when I applied was to kind of celebrate diversity and expand on our diverse growth in Southlake, Texas, and be able to bring everyone together in our community to really recognize the different residents that we have within Southlake. But it didn't turn out to be that way. It was a 63-member council that was hand-selected, and we learned later on that I was one of few, maybe 2 or 3, that shared different ideas or opinions than the rest of the council.
You're more conservative than the rest of the council.
Correct.
Conservative it is. Okay. And so just to start for our listeners by background, for information, but your background, you grew up in America?
I'm born and raised in Texas. I'm a Texan. I'm a retired law enforcement agent. I was a special agent with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Homeland Security Investigations. I medically retired due to being shot in the line of duty.
Okay, but you are of Hispanic background.
And I'm Hispanic, yes.
Okay, just making that clear before we launch in this story. So you're on this diversity council with the goal of understanding diversity, helping to, maybe smooth the way and having people of various backgrounds feel comfortable in the Carroll, Southlake area. So what has happened since then is kind of mind-blowing. And actually, I'll tell our listeners very quickly, I was at a conference last week in Washington, and people in this conference go out and introduce themselves, say, hi, I'm so-and-so. They each introduce themselves. It's a pretty small, intense national conservative conference. So one gentleman who stood up said, hi, I'm here from Texas, and who'd have thought that communism would come to a school district in Texas? And I knew what he was talking about. I mean, I happen to know him too, but I knew what he's probably talking about. So you have this work, and you were at the time, you obviously applied to be part of it. You thought it was going to be a great thing to help understand with diversity. So, but it got off a little bit off track. And so it ended up producing, this organization ended up producing a CCAP, another acronym for us, CCAP, Cultural Competence Action Plan.
Right.
This was a plan developed by this group to help. I didn't even like the term cultural competence because it sounds like you're incompetent if you won't agree with whatever the left wants you to say. But it evolved a cultural competence action plan. Can you tell me, first of all, were there discussions and disagreements in the council meetings during the time that you were a part of it?
Very much so. They were very upfront about it. This was a place to open up and to be able to discuss your opinions. They said there was going to be likely you would feel uncomfortable at certain times because we're talking about racism, racist issues, and discrimination and the sort. And so it was a place to where we could be able to share our ideas and our opinions. And so we were broken off into subcommittees. I ended up working the subcommittee for hiring teachers and staff. But what turned out to be what you see now, we have in front of us, this plan, none of our, at least my, ideas or suggestions made it to the plan. They were kind of taken over by the rest of the DDC, the District Diversity Council. And so I was very vocal within the subcommittee to share my opinion. For example, they want to hire diverse teachers at Carroll. And I'm all for that if they're the best qualified. And I made that very clear. When I grew up in El Paso, Texas, 84% Hispanics, some of the best teachers I had were black and white, and I didn't care. I didn't have to identify with them because of their color of their skin for me to be able to learn from them. And I made that very clear, and most of the people in my committee agreed with that. But if you look at the report, it doesn't reflect that. At least my portion of it does not.
So the report was really looking at the whole big school picture, including hiring, and those of the more left-wing persuasion were really kind of focused on race or ethnicity as the determining factor. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. So you didn't get your way on some of those issues, which is, this happens in a big group. But I want to get around to, I want to get around to talking about one thing that you told me. And I'm glad we talked about this way ahead of time, so I have, copious notes about all that's occurred. It turned out that a group of students and recent graduates, so former students, recent graduates, had undertaken an effort to solicit input from students and former students about whether they had experienced racism, discomfort, any kind of racial discomfort in their time when they're at the Carroll ISD. Were you aware of that soliciting of information while you were serving on the Diversity Council? I
did not. And to give you a little bit of a time frame here, on July 23rd, we had a big DDC meeting via Zoom. And that's the first time that I learned of SARC.
Of this year, 2020?
Of 2020, this summer. I learned of SARC, the South Lake Anti-Racism Coalition. I had never heard of them before, but apparently some of our board members had been meeting with them periodically before then. And so they gave us the 21 page, 17-point demand letter the day of the July 23rd. It might have been the evening before, as an agenda that we were going to talk about on top of the CCAP, the Cultural Competency Program.
Okay. For those of us who have to have acronyms or be reminded about them, your group was the District Diversity Council.
Yes.
Your group came up with the CCAP, the Cultural Competence Action Plan, CCAP Cultural Competence Action Plan. So the meeting you're describing in July of this year, of 2020, was the culmination of meetings that started in January of 19, culmination of months of meetings, discussion about what you proposed, and at that meeting, or maybe the day before, you were presented with a different document from a different group that you were unaware of up until that day.
That's
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and this other group presented not just, hey, here's some swell other ideas. The group presented, and this is our other acronym to keep straight, South Lake Anti-Racism Coalition, SARC or SARC. So they, at this July meeting, when the Diversity Council, people who are supposed to be creating diversity policy or at least proposals, were going to be summarizing their meetings, this group SARC showed up with the demand letter. And the demand letter is an extremely detailed set of demands about the South Lake Carroll district, or the Carroll ISD district. And I want to back up and say, you told me before there was overlap between the people who created this SARC, which you were unaware of until that day, and the people on your committee, the Diversity Council, and even school board members. Can you describe that?
Let me explain that. There's a lot of overlap here. And I found out 2 of those overlaps on that same day during the Zoom meeting. I realized that some of the SARC members, these high school kids and recent graduates, were also have been members of the DDC, the District Diversity Council, all along since January of 2019. I didn't know that until it came out right then and there, and I'll tell you how it came out. We were discussing the SARC demand letter, and I stood up and I defended point number 16, that they demand that our school resource officers be, first of all, disarmed, and then eventually replaced with social workers or psychologists. And I disagree 100% with that. As a former law enforcement officer, I'm a big supporter of law enforcement, and I disagreed with that point. And I mentioned that. I stood up during the meeting, I got unmuted, and I voiced my opinion as to how much I disagreed with that demand. I was immediately attacked for doing that, and they brought up Black Lives Matter. They brought all these other issues during that same meeting, and I said, of course Black Lives Matters, but Asian Lives Matters, Hispanic Lives Matters. They attacked me because I said the word "but" after Black Lives Matter. You're not allowed to say anything after Black Lives Matter. I also said that I didn't believe that there was systemic racism in South Lake, how they were perceiving our town to be. And they're painting our town as something that is not. And I told them, I don't believe there's systemic racism in South Lake, even in the United States. Do I believe there's racism? Of course, does it exist? Evil exists. I've seen it in the eye. I know, because bad exists, good exists. But they didn't want to hear any of that. They didn't want to hear my opinion because it came from a conservative point of view. And so I got attacked on social media from parents, from lawyers, and from these kids.
Okay, I want to talk about the attacks against you, but back to this whole episode. I just think it's important to get clear. You all had the very public face of the DDC. You're on this diversity council. You're there to talk about these issues. So kind of behind the scenes, below the surface, unbeknownst to you, and I guess most people, there was another set of meetings going on involving people, some of them who were on the diversity council, coming up with a list of demands, and they also did a survey. And I want to get back to that survey thing. They surveyed students and former students and asked them to tell any experiences you've had which you viewed as racist. And so you viewed it as insensitive, whatever their words were. And they did get a litany of complaints from former students and students saying, I experienced XYZ, and this I perceived as racist. So they had over 300 complaints. So they were, I'm getting this because I'm seeing this as a tactic. I mean, if you're soliciting stories because you're really trying to sabotage the outcome of this demand letter. You're making it so that anyone who would oppose every demand they make can be characterized as racist. I mean, you have a survey, no chance on the part of students whose conduct is being labeled as racist, whether or not they're identified. You have students reporting they experienced racism, and because that survey was done and demand letter issued, the only right answer permitted is to say, you're right, what do you want us to do? We surrender. Is that fair?
That's fair, and the words you mentioned are correct. I started feeling at that time during that meeting on July 23rd that our CCAP was sabotaged. But furthermore, I also thought, well, now maybe this cultural competency action plan is not what it was intentionally supposed to be, and it was maybe now flawed from the beginning and from its foundation, and therefore the issues then started arising because the community then became aware, and our what we call our silent majority was no longer silent, and we started speaking up and asking for questions. So all this came forward to an August 3rd meeting for the CISD school board meeting.
Before we get to there, the CCAP, the entity, the product that your diversity council created, cultural competence action plan. I know you said things were in there that you didn't agree with and you had voiced your opinion. One was with respect to teachers and whether you should hire based on race and ethnicity. But isn't it also the CCAP that has a provision in it that relates to the reporting of microaggressions? Can you explain what was written in that report about microaggressions?
Well, they define microaggressions, and the definition is very subjective. And it wants to document, report, and track these incidents that students might tell on another student, and have that report carry on and follow that student until it's after graduation, until it's university or college that he or she attends.
So a student in high school might say to another student, nice hair, or, it's kind of wild outfit, something which they maybe even thought was friendly, or they were just joking around. But if the recipient's offended and views it to be an aggression, they felt like they were being attacked, they can report that. And then once that report is made, that report of the words or action by another student goes into that student's report, the one who said, hey, nice hair, or whatever. I just made up that example, but that would go in the student's file and follow them through college.
That's correct. And the big thing about microaggressions is that what might be a microaggression to you might not be to me, and vice versa. And it might be racist. We don't know, right?
Right.
But the problem is that now it muddies the real concept, and what we want to do is to better our community and understand and basically discipline and use our student code of conduct that we have. We have a very strong student code of conduct at Carroll ISD. Maybe the issue is to start enforcing the student code of conduct rather than to include more rules, more quote unquote laws within our community. Procedures, policies, okay. Right.
So if the student, just to understand how this CCAP thing was supposed to work, so if a student said, I am the victim of a microaggression because so-and-so said something, does the so-and-so who said something, do they have a chance to say anything like, I was joking around, come on, you said that to me? No defense.
That's not, if that's the case, that's not explained on this report.
Oh
and
my
so
gosh.
it kind of goes back to being guilty before being innocent, right? Being charged with
guilty because accused.
Yeah, because accused, and doesn't give the victim in this case or the other reverse victim the opportunity to defend themselves.
Okay. That by itself is truly astonishing. We've gotten that point that we would just give credence without a real process. And then, and also it's following, I'm sure there are very few Americans alive today who could say, I've never in my life said anything insensitive, anything unthoughtful. I've always behaved perfectly. Because in the real world, especially when you're growing up and you're learning how to act, you're going to do things that aren't perfect. And the way as adults whether you're the parents or the school, the way adults should interact is say, hey, you know what? That's pretty insensitive. We don't really want to talk that way. There was one incident, to be really clear, and it was in the paper, I recall it, but there was one incident that had come to national attention that involved some cheerleaders. I think they were cheerleaders, right? At Carroll ISD?
Yes.
Who, at an off-campus event,
correct, had
recorded themselves on some social media, and it was a very offensive chanting. I believe they may have used the N-word.
Yes,
it was very singing or chanting. It was really obnoxious, really offensive. And there was a sense, I believe, that the school did not adequately deal with those students. So, is that part of what drove all of this?
Yes, that video, there's a couple of incidents, the one you just mentioned, that kind of stirred up the creation of the District Diversity Council. But it seemed that the way forward to deal with that issue could have been to deal maybe harsher with the students or whatever. I don't know the details of what happened to the students or what discipline came about, but apparently people were dissatisfied with that. And that's understandable. But to create and make everyone now blanketed a racist community because of one video of certain people is not fair to the rest of the community.
Oh, yeah. And actually, you could kind of see both sides in the sense that if something did happen that was so insensitive, and the sense of parents, maybe because they didn't know what discipline was imposed, because you don't always know what schools do. They often keep discipline private. Maybe they didn't know, maybe there wasn't discipline. So to address that issue would really be, it would be incumbent on the school to address that, to respond to concerns. But as you say, to change the entire structure, culture of a school, to put in place a behemoth program. By the way, if you're watching this, I'll just show you. I couldn't even get the whole Carroll. This is Carroll ISD Cultural Competence Action Plan. This is even the plan coming out of the legitimate committee, the diversity committee, district diversity committee. It's so thick I had to use 2 staples. I'm going to put this available on our website, americacanwetalk.org, where you can read it. But this is what the legitimate committee created. So then you get back to July 23rd, you show up at a meeting, the kind of wrapping up of this section, and you are confronted with the South Lake Anti-Racism Coalition demand letter, a whole other group meeting. You've been unaware until then. And they have issued, separate from your CCAP, a bunch of demands. And you mentioned one.
They want those demands, by the way, incorporated and implemented into the CCAP. They wanted them incorporated.
That's what they were asking that
Yes.
day in July
Yes.
of this year, 2020.
Yes.
They were demanding that these things get incorporated into, and you, or at least most people you're aware of on your committee, had no role in creating this. This is what they created, SARC created.
Well, the SARC members, some of the SARC members are also members of the DDC.
But they didn't during DDC meetings say,
well,
hey, by the
that I
way,
don't
we
know.
have this sneaky
That I
little
don't
group.
know. I don't know what their agenda
were you
was.
there? You were at the meetings?
I was there, but I didn't know they were SARC members. I don't know when they created SARC.
Oh, right. I get that.
Right.
I'm just saying, if you're part of a committee and you're working on a problem and you realize that your little subgroup is running off and creating,
Right.
an ulterior and far more menacing set of, it's not just a menacing set of demands, it is the entire tactic of saying, we're meeting here today and we demand you do this. Okay, so you mentioned one thing that was really, was defunding the police there.
Yes.
And when you use the expression, I know that you guys use the school resource officers, but they're police officers.
The police officers paid by the taxpayers. The citizens of Southlake voted unanimously, overwhelmingly, to place these officers in our schools after the Newtown shooting in
For
2012. Of safety and many other things. Our resource officers, our school resource officers, do much more than just protect our students. They're there. They play many roles in helping
Yeah.
the community, the students. There's a great communication and between the students and the officers. They help a lot of students tremendously sometimes in even counseling, and really keep being aware and gathering intelligence if in case someone would want to harm our kids.
Well, yeah. In fact, like the thing from the first segment of the show today, the dad who was telling the
That's absolutely right.
horrific story of his daughter having been murdered in a public school, he had a litany of things he went through. The school shooter had done a long list of things. Anyone in their right mind, hearing him once, would say, you know what, this kid shouldn't be in school. But because of leftist policies and restorative justice and all of that, he was allowed to stay in school until he got to that day. But so these school resource officers would be observing students as part of their
Absolutely.
role. They'd be
Absolutely.
saying, this kid, I don't know, something
right.
wrong over here. I'm not sure. Okay, so that was one demand. That's actually number 16. The very first demand I want to talk about too. And again, people, I'm not talking about like a one-page demand. I'm talking like a thick document. Again, and I'll put it up on our website. Southlake Anti-Racism Coalition Demand Letter. One thing, the very thing, number one, I'm just going to tell you what it says, and then we'll talk about it. But number one is saying, it lists after a 5-page tirade about what a horrible place this is. And by the way, Southlake Carroll is a lovely area, and it is a sought-after area. It's a lovely area, and people want their kids to go to school there. Parents want their kids to go to those schools because they're great schools. So you have this list of demands after a 5-page, just we hate America and everybody in it, kind of to summarize the 5 pages of the introduction. We hate America and everybody in it. And then they went to their demands. First one, as a United School Board, Carroll ISD, so these are demands they're making of the school board, must publicly condemn recent events of police brutality, not in their own district, around the country. Just make a comment about whatever police brutality incidents have happened around the country, recognize and denounce the individual and systemic racism in Southlake. So the presumption is systemic racism exists, you have to admit it. We can't even talk about why are you saying systemic racism exists? To what do you point? What evidence? It is a leftist tactic to denounce a school and then say, and you got to admit it. And then the other one was unequivocally state Black Lives Matter. That's the rule you broke. You were not unequivocal.
Right.
Okay.
And by the way, really quick, I challenged them on the systemic racism. I challenged them in that their letter comes across as factual, as a matter of fact, and I challenged them on that. I said it might be their opinion that there's systemic racism, and my opinion is it's not. But my opinion doesn't matter to them. They won't want to listen to mine.
Okay. You challenged them in the July meeting.
I challenged them
It was
right
a
then
Zoom meeting.
in the Zoom meeting, correct.
Okay, so this whole, and that's why I said this is a Marxist takeover. This is anatomy of how you do it. By the time you get this meeting, they've got some segment of their diversity council on board with them. They've got these demands, and all of a sudden the school is supposed to admit we're racist, the country's terrible, we have systemic racism, police are bad, and that's the starting point as they launch off their demands. So you push back a little bit. How did they take it that you push back?
Well, they attacked me on social media. They went to my Instagram, Facebook, and they went. And it's not just the students, by the way. It's the parents. A lot of adults.
Parents of the students?
I don't know if they're the parents, but there was a lot of adults attacking me because I support law enforcement. I had a blue line flag outside of my house. They called me a pig, a racist. My son has a picture with the South Lake chief of police because he attended a youth academy, called him the future racist. And so they're vile and with their comments and disrespectful. I never was with mine. All I did was support our police and give my opinion and my conservative view that I think I'm entitled to. But they won't hear it. They don't want to hear my portion of it. And so if you fast forward after that, it kind of spun it actually did a great thing for us because it exposed SARC. It exposed what the CCAP really is. And our citizens are wide awake. Our conservative, South Lake conservative values are up and running, and we're not going to let this go through. Now, if you fast forward to the August 3rd school board meeting, it's very important because 2 of the district diversity council members are also Carroll ISD Independent School District Board of Trustees. And so there's a conflict of interest there as well. They were pushing for the passage of the CCAP on August 3rd. Luckily, we have other board members that fought back and said, by the way, that meeting, which was also virtual, had over 100 speakers. A lot of SARC members spoke. A lot of conservative value members from our community spoke as well. And trying to convince the board not to pass this, pass this and implement it. That's what they want to do right then and there.
All demands implemented.
That's what they wanted. Kind of what Congress does, right? They get a bill and you'll read it when you pass it.
Right.
Well, they hadn't had the chance to really go through it and understand it. And so it was a very convoluted meeting. It was a 5-hour-long meeting. Eventually, they decided to vote on it, but only to accept the plan, not to implement it, and then establish workshops to go through it. So the workshops are now scheduled and will be in September. So the DDC, we're going to go back. I'm not sure what the workshops are for. They're going to go line by line to explain to the board what the CCAP and what it means, and then go back to see if it wants to be implemented. I think at this point, the CCAP is broken. It is not a reflection of all of our citizens. We want this process to be transparent. We want it to be public. The 63 members that were handpicked by the school administration or CISD administration does not reflect everyone else. And so now it's the opportunity to bring everybody along. Let's have the input from all of our community and have them really give their opinion as to what they believe should be, or maybe not even include in this report. And I think that's what I'm calling for right now. Let's make all the hearings public, the DDC meetings and the workshops, have everyone's input allowed.
Didn't you tell me earlier that even though the school board voted to accept but not implement, it appears as though some things are being implemented even though they weren't supposed to be? Tell us about that.
That is correct. And one of them that I could point out is a training that teachers had to go through right before school started this week. And it was a training that teachers had to go through as a cultural competence. Here we go with that term again. They had to show something about the teachers and show their bias. And so there are things that are being implemented that are technically not implemented or approved by the board at this time. So that's a major concern for us as well.
Okay, when you talk about bias, teachers, in part, I understand, are being required, or in this training, being acquired or instructed, you need to accept your white privilege, you need to acknowledge it, you need to do whatever it is they're going to say they got to do. And this is, again, this point I want to make. This is leftists using race to bring Marxism. Leftists using race to bring totalitarian control. They're going to be control over every kid in that school and every teacher in the school and who gets hired and what you're allowed to say and how your school record is going to look. It is a complete abandonment of normal assumptions of American life, including innocent until proven guilty. And on this whole white privilege thing, which has overtaken this country, there are more and more people, conservative Black Americans, speaking up and saying, there's no such thing as systemic racism in America. This is a tactic. The people who made the Uncle Tom movie say it. Brandon Tatum on my show said this. The systemic racism accusation against America is a tactic to force Americans to capitulate to whatever the left wants. And what they're really doing, why it is so sinister and evil, is because it is playing on the good people of America, because most people in America do not want to have a racist country. We're a nation filled with people who want to love our neighbor as ourselves. And when someone's telling us there's systemic racism everywhere, we react. We don't want to have that. So we say, okay, well, gosh, that's terrible. So tell me what I should do. And you end up having people capitulate to demands of the left because they are lied to about this massive systemic racism. It's a tool to manipulate the good-hearted people of America to give in to tyranny.
I'll put it to you this way. We don't want our school districts, our educators, to teach racism, to teach hate, to teach intolerance. We want them to teach love, respect, hard work, teamwork. And our kids get enough of hate and enough of negativity on social media as it is that parents have a hard time controlling what our kids see, right, on social media. And so we don't need our public school systems to do that. We already have enough challenges at home trying to protect that. With my kids, they know what evil is. They know what bad is. They also know what good is. And I want the school district to be able to show them the positives of our world instead of our negatives.
Okay, didn't you tell me too in one of our conversations, I guess off air, but that when you first heard all this, you actually talked to one of your sons, one of your children, to say, gee, I'm hearing this systemic racism. You know, what do you experience at school?
Yeah, they made me question it. And I asked my son, who's now a sophomore in high school, I said, you got to tell me what's going on in the school. You got to be honest with me and tell me if you're being bullied because you're Hispanic, because of the way you look, racism, discrimination, whatever. Please tell me what's going on. He's like, Dad, absolutely none of that. My son is active. He plays soccer. He loves Carroll ISD. We love Southlake, Texas. We wouldn't live there if we didn't. And so we came here because of the safety and security. We came here because of the schools. Many people did the same.
Yeah.
And so my son is like, I don't know what you're talking about, Dad, but I've never seen that or experienced any of that.
Yeah. One of the points, in wrapping up today, one of the points you made in one of our conversations was about, because of your work formerly with Homeland Security, you've lived in other countries, you've traveled in other countries, and you've seen what you think is a more realistic affair to characterize as a racist country. But when you contrast America to those other countries, you just can't see the systemic racism argument about America. You
know, I say this, I don't share this story a lot, but I have mentioned it before that I've never experienced racism anywhere in the United States or around the world, only in one place, and that's in Mexico, in my own country of heritage where my parents are from, and that's very sad. And so I have experienced racism. I have experienced evil because of what I went through. And so I've seen both and stared them in the face, and I know how to identify it.
Okay, so takeaway for our listeners as we wrap up. You know, obviously people living there in Carroll ISD need to be tuned in to what the school is considering, tuned into the demands Sark is making, and tuned into what the school might just do to their own children. And so how do parents do something about this?
Be engaged. They're coming out. Send the emails to the board members, to our CISD school officials and administrators. Let them know what your thoughts are and what your opinions are, because these decisions affect our kids directly, and not just our kids. They bring home what they hear at, we already have a problem with our universities doing that to our kids. We don't need them to start doing it now at the high school level. And so I want to be able to bring that, and I'll put in a little bit of my candidacy here. I'll bring the strong leadership to Southlake that I have in my career to not let things like this happen in our community.
Okay, and you have a website for your campaign?
Yes, victorforsouthlake.com, and Facebook, Victor for Southlake.
Victor for Southlake. Victor Avila, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Debbie, for having me. Thank you so much.
That is quite the story, folks. I want to hit one more story today very briefly. And I know this, we talk about coronavirus a lot in the show. We're going to keep on talking about it, but I want to just share a couple of things with you because what I really think is happening right now in our country with respect to coronavirus and COVID-19 and the just relentless restrictions and rules and perpetuating in various levels of society the shutdown of America. Number one, There was a doctor who spoke on Mark Levin's show. He's from Yale, Dr. Risch. He's a noted Yale epidemiologist, and he did an interview, and I don't have time to play the clip today, but he was on Mark Levin's show, and he talked about the astonishing truth and his knowledge of epidemiology that Dr. Fauci, the one who runs the show pretty much in America related to coronavirus policy, was guilty as back decades ago when our country was dealing with the HIV epidemic of being, my word, not his, prissy, too demanding. When someone had found a drug that worked and really helped HIV patients, he would not authorize CDC to move forward in allowing it to be available. He actually points, this Dr. Risch from Harvard points to Fauci, from Yale, points to Dr. Fauci as literally responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of Americans because he's too demanding. Well, we haven't had a double-blind study, on a Tuesday while it's raining. He's got too many restrictions, and when you're facing a serious challenge, this is a guy who just wants to go do experiments in a lab instead of dealing with reality, and he's saying the same thing now. He holds Dr. Fauci responsible for not permitting hydroxychloroquine as one solution to be available to the American people abundantly and without restriction. It has been a circus listening to what Dr. Fauci has to say about hydroxychloroquine, and there are, as we've talked about in the show many times already, 53 global studies showing positive results of hydroxychloroquine on COVID-19. We have studies where Dr. Fauci has pointed to them, but it turns out this study, which was negative as to hydroxychloroquine, was conducted in absurd circumstances, intentionally sabotaging the outcome of the study by prescribing far too much of hydroxychloroquine than is possibly necessary. This is a very dangerous situation, and literally millions of Americans are waking up to the idea that we're being played with this Dr. Fauci shutting down hydroxychloroquine. On a similar note, I'd like to point that Vice President and now presidential candidate Joe Biden has already said in this campaign, if he gets in, we're going back to masks day one. Everyone's going to wear masks. And number two, he said he would definitely shut down the country down again if the experts or the specialists told him to do that. When pressed, as in which specialist? What about the people talking about those suffering from mental health challenges because they've been shut in too long? What about them? And, he doesn't have an answer for that. He just keeps going to experts. But the point I want to really make in this closing of this last segment is this. I want to encourage Americans to really think about what circumstance could there possibly be, what circumstance when we will finally be told in America, you get to go back to normal. I want you to really think about this because originally we were told we had to shut down, couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything because, after all, we had to make sure we had sufficient hospital beds. And so that became the non-issue because there are sufficient hospital beds. We don't have the crisis, the hospital bed or ICU bed availability. We don't have that anymore. So that was the first kind of argument, was the hospital bed availability. That is not a problem anymore. Now we have the argument that, we got to wait for the vaccine because, the vaccine really, and once we have that, everything will be fine. Then you had Fauci say just the other day, actually, when vaccines come along, quite often, they're only really effective for half the population at the most. You have studies that show that a significant portion of Americans will not take the vaccine in this case because they don't like how the government's already shut down their freedom and they don't want to have the government do more. And then you have, and this is the argument I want to get to, and I'm going to play a clip in just a moment. Matt the Wonderful has a clip from a guy in Shasta, California, and I'm telling you people, there are millions of Americans getting to the level of frustration this guy has.
I'm telling you guys, I'm pretty appalled at what's going on. At first we sat as concerned citizens and we all wanted to figure out how to best navigate our way through this whole COVID thing, and as we realized that it's not quite as dangerous as we thought it'd be, I was absolutely appalled at the cowardice, and as you're sitting there with your masks on, I don't blame you for wearing masks because I'd be hiding my face too if I was you for what you're doing. This is absolutely horrendous what you're doing to these people. I'm a business owner, and I'm telling you, our families are starving. You guys can sit here with your jobs, you can sit here and you're gonna get paid, you can fall asleep in your chair like that gentleman's doing behind his mask right there, okay? And I'm telling you right now we're being peaceful. And you better be happy that we're good citizens, that we're peaceful citizens. But it's not going to be peaceful much longer. Okay? And this isn't a threat. I'm not a criminal. I've never been a criminal. But I'm telling you that good citizens are going to turn into real concerned and revolutionary citizens real soon. And nobody else is going to say that. I'm probably the only person that has the balls to say what I'm saying right now. That we're building, we're organizing, and we'll work with law enforcement or without law enforcement. But you won't stop us when time comes because our families are starving. And if you don't hear the seriousness of my voice, I hope you open your ears and you absolutely listen to what I'm saying. Because this is a warning for what's coming. It's not going to be peaceful much longer. It's not going to be rah-rah. It's not going to be speeches. It's not going to be gathered outside saying a Pledge of Allegiance. It's not going to be waving flags. It's going to be real. When you've seen the things that I've seen, I went to war for this country. I've seen the ugliest, dirtiest part of humanity. I've been in combat, and I never want to go back again. But I'm telling you what, I will to save this country. If it has to be against our own citizens, it will happen. And there's a million people like me, and you won't stop us. Open the county. Let our citizens do what they need to do. Let owners of businesses do what they need to do to feed their families. Take the masks off. Quit masking and muzzling your children. The psychological damage you're doing to them is horrible. I've had 6 friends kill themselves since it's happened. Veterans who lost their jobs. How do you feel about being complicit in perpetuating that? The greatest hoax ever perpetuated on the American people, and you're a part of it by wearing your masks. In Shasta County, we're supposed to be red country up here. Not blue country, we're red country up here.
Okay, that guy's name is Carlos Zapata. That went viral, as you might imagine. But I want to close out the show by saying this. He's the everyday guy American. He's similar to the guy who, I think was in New Jersey, who stood up at a city council meeting and talked about not giving up our guns ever, so don't even think about it. But this guy, his passion, his frustration, his just anger is shared by millions of Americans because Americans are wide awake to the reality. This is not the plague. This is less lethal than the flu, that we have a 99% survival rate, that we never needed to quarantine the healthy to start with. We've never done that before. Quarantining the healthy is not right. We've had Fauci running the show in Washington. And my one ever reservation about President Trump is whether or not he recognizes how much Fauci has played him. I do think President Trump, and he has acknowledged, the left wants to keep this shutdown going as long as they can, but even here, and to hurt him. So people see that, millions of Americans see that, but the frustration in that guy's voice is felt by literally millions of Americans. And I really ask you to think about this. What circumstance can you picture and honestly convince yourself that, if that happened, my governor, my mayor, my county judge, my city council would open everything up? We'd be back to normal. We'd have normal America back. There is no circumstance, people. You've got to understand this. This alleged vaccine that, again, isn't ready, isn't necessarily going to be effective by any more than 50% of the people. Lots of people won't take it. This vaccine is not going to be the time they say, okay, we have a vaccine, now you can have your life back. Leftists in this country have found a tool to keep the American people suppressed, to keep them obedient and fearful and in their homes. It has shut down the economy, shut down businesses, destroyed businesses, shut down families, killed people, and the left isn't letting go of this because this is their one way they can keep the American people muzzled, silenced, and fearful. In a free country like America, the fact is, once we figured out this is not the plague, this is not the bubonic plague, this is a bad flu, and we're going to do everything we can to help the people who need help, the answer of the government is to provide information to the public, to recommend to those who are concerned about their health, have pre-existing conditions, or some other reason they are fearful, to go ahead and wear masks, or if you want to, stay home. But requiring healthy people to shut down their businesses, micromanaging people inside America's businesses and restaurants and stores is unjustified tyranny in this country. And there are millions of Americans wide awake to this, and that guy in Shasta County is speaking for millions of Americans. I really want America's leaders to recognize that we've been patient, people have been calm, they have been dutiful, they have been law-abiding, and they've had it. They're done with the idea that we're going to surrender our liberty in this country, surrender our access to our businesses, to our jobs, to restaurants, to stores, to normal life in America based on this virus. And something else, people, even if we had the vaccine of the century and it came out, and it had no side effects. It was 100% effective, and everyone took it. So we had no one allegedly vulnerable to the coronavirus. Do you actually think the leftists who have been inflicting tyranny on this country would all of a sudden say, oh, okay, we're done. Hey, life back to normal? Because there's always going to be the next virus. There are mutations of this coronavirus right now. There'll be another virus, another health threat. We are surrendering the presumption of liberty in this country, and the time to stand up and fight about it is now. And as I always do at the close of every show, I tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. And so we started our show today with this story of the RNC 2020 Rocked Day One, and they really, really did. Very refreshing. RNC went on the offense, positive, high energy, high hope for all Americans. Andrew Pollitt, guns are not the problem, sheeple are, or bad leftist policies are. Herschel Walker, a 37-year friendship with Donald Trump, puts the lie to racist Trump. I don't even know if, for those of you who aren't sports fans, Herschel Walker is black. And I wouldn't have known actually who he was, except all of this attention. But in any case, he's been friends with Trump for 37 years, a joint family ride on It's a Small World at Disney World. Maximo Alvarez, you heard a little clip from him, a refugee from communism, sounding the warning as one who knows. Rebecca Friedrichs, teachers' unions are the problem, acting against the will of teachers, controlling a leftist indoctrination agenda, opposing school choice. Rebecca will be a guest speaker at my American Women and American Freedom Conference in Dallas on September 26th. Contact me at americacanwetalk@gmail.com. If you'd like more information, we got new data on our ticket sales. We're doing great. So if you want to come, please email me. And then COVID, medical and mask tyranny, and why it matters to you. You have President Biden. President Joe Biden would be okay with ordering all Americans to mask up day one. That was the language of his vice presidential choice. Okay with shutting down the entire country again if the experts tell him to do so. Unclear which experts, doesn't want to answer that question. Compared with world-renowned Yale epidemiologist Dr. Harvey Risch, who, with Mark Levin, said there's a massive disinformation campaign against HCQ, hydroxychloroquine, has caused thousands of American deaths. It's utterly unsupportable by science. Carlos Zapata of Shasta County, California, gave voice to the spirit of America. A revolution is brewing against COVID tyranny. Ask yourself, when, how do you believe that power-hungry leftists will ever let this end? And that, my very fine friends, is America Can We Talk for today. Tune in every Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, to America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.